Welcome to this week's episode of
Hey, I think we're good here.
I'm one of your co-hosts, Jackson Metakekia.
And I'm Matt West. And we're here getting to know the sport of volleyball through the life experiences our guests have to share with us. Come take a look. We're back in action with our first guest, professional player Carli Snyder, after a brief hiatus there. Carli takes us through her club and recruiting experience, how much the club game has changed, and why she believes so many recruits transfer after their first year. She discusses her playing time for Mary Wise at the University of Florida and the track she took to becoming a multiple-time All-American. She also talks about how the players actually do evaluations on one another and what that brings to the table at Florida. Enjoy!
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Jackson, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Carli.
Matt, nice to see you again.
Great to see you too. It's been all of 48 hours.
I know. I haven't known what to do with myself.
Normal reaction when people see me.
Okay.
Well, welcome to the podcast, dude.
Thank you. I'm really excited. I've listened to a few episodes and it's really fun to listen to, and I'm honored to be on. So thanks for having me.
What's your favorite outside of Mary Wise?
Maddie, of course, because she's a very good friend of mine, and I enjoy listening to her talk about volleyball and her journey because we've spoken about it as individuals. So it's just nice to rehear it, and she has a really unique path and a good opinion. So yeah, it's my favorite one. Don't roll your eyes, Matt. Your girlfriend's awesome. And I liked listening to the Mary podcast because I knew a lot about her journey, but I wasn't super aware of the beginning of her career and how those things, we kind of brushed over it when she was explaining that to me on my recruiting and while I was at Florida. So it was really interesting to hear it more in depth.
Sure. She's really cool. She's one of the most fun podcasts that I had. Well, unfortunately, Jackson couldn't hop onto that one, but she's awesome. She reminds me so much of Marv, and like her philosophy towards her athletes, which I obviously admired a lot.
I think it's cool. It was cool to listen to because my mom was coaching tennis around the same time Mary started coaching college volleyball, and I know from like my mom's perspective how difficult it was to be a mom and to like balance winning and making people into actual good people when they're done leaving your program, which I think like as you've been in it a little bit longer, you kind of have the room to wiggle on that. But in the beginning, it just felt like if an athletic director could like fire a female head coach, it was like definitely going to happen. So you really had to produce, which is cool to hear about in the beginning of her journey and related to my mom's.
Yeah, she's totally stuck it out. Obviously, she's had tremendous success.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure. Well, Jackson, how do we start this? It's been a while.
No, just tell us how you got started in volleyball and kind of why'd you pick volleyball versus anything else.
So my mom is a college tennis coach. My dad is a basketball coach. So I played both of those sports growing up, and I did enjoy those sports, and I had a lot of fun playing, but there wasn't this like passion or drive necessarily. It was just that my family's really sporty and we love to play, so I was always participating in something. And then my sister, who's 3 years older, was on her middle school volleyball team. At that time, like club was just mind-blowing to my family that people could play year round and pay money to play volleyball. So when my sister tried out for the middle school team, she actually was invited to be on like a state or regional club team, which from my like 11-year-old's eyes, when I was watching those players on my sister's 14-year-old state team, I was like mind blown. And I would come to her practices and stay on the side of the gym. My mom would come with us, and I would like bump against the wall and try to mimic the drills that they were doing in her practice, until eventually I would just pray that someone was sick or injured, because then they would need an extra body and I would be invited to be the worst player on the floor who couldn't get my serve over the net from like I would like stand 3/4 of the way in. And so my mom and I would stand in pepper. We would pass back and forth, try to keep the ball off the ground on the side and just wait for someone to be injured or sick. And that led me to try out for a club team when I was 11 years old on a U12 national team. And it was one of the first times I'd ever played with girls my own age on a net when I showed up to tryouts. And my spandex were like hanging off my body. And I, basically just got very lucky making a U12 national team when I was young. That's how I got started.
Wow. I feel like everybody that has so far on this podcast, everybody that's had success in their career, such as yourself, has started volleyball at a really young age, has come from an athletic background where their parents have coached something. And that being said, did your parents care what sport you played, or did they just care that you cared about what you were doing?
As coaches, I think my parents cared very little about what sport I was actually playing. And I think when I was playing basketball, a sport my mom played in college and my dad coached, they knew a lot, but they didn't give constant feedback. They were really laid back parents who more so critiqued if I was being a good teammate, if they thought I was working hard. And so when I decided to play volleyball, I I don't think they knew the opportunities that volleyball could open up for me. My mom was like thinking I would never make the varsity volleyball team because she watched those girls and thought they were amazing. So they really didn't care. It was just, I think, exciting to them because as coaches, and as you know, because your parents coach, Matt, like the favorite athletes are the gym rats who just want to be in the gym, want practice to be 5 hours long when you're a kid. And I was 100% that kid who like made my parents set up a volleyball court in our backyard and was like serving against a fence and then chasing it and then serving the other way and then chasing it. So I think they really enjoyed just watching me care a lot about something.
When did it become apparent to your family, probably more your parents than you, that you were going to have some kind of future success in this sport?
I asked my mom that not too long ago because if you watch one of my games, she doesn't really like clap for me because she doesn't want to be that parent who's obsessed with their kid, basically. So I was curious what she had to say about that and just like also looking maybe for some approval from my mother being like, when did you think I was good? Or when did you know I would go and play like at a Power 5 school or something? And she said that I was crying when I was 13 about not making the 14 national team because I was always kind of a perfectionist with my game and really was finding the mistakes and wanting to get better. And even as a kid, I was like, I'm not going to make the ones team next year. And I was like crying about it. And my mom told me, like, the first time she ever told me something like this, she was like, you were the best player on your team last year. Like, you're like good. And I think at that point, she knew that I was playing well. And then it was maybe a year later when when I was in 8th grade and I started getting college letters from Power 5 schools. And my parents were like, oh, she's going to get a college scholarship probably, which is very relieving to them because college is freaking expensive.
That is a pretty wild turn from spandex hanging off the legs to hitting balls over your fence. And 2 years later, you now have recruiting letters from Power 5 schools.
When I got recruiting letters, my spandex were still not fitting. I was so skinny. So that was like a until my sophomore year of high school. But yeah, that was a common theme. And then I put a little meat on my bones, but yeah, still working on it.
What was the first letter or who did you receive your first letter from? Do you remember?
That's so funny because I was talking to the coach from Duke about this. I was just talking to her about this recently, that she was my first letter, Coach Nagel from Duke. And I was, as a kid, like, firstly, I'm definitely gonna go to Duke because they're interested in me, and wow. And I also made my dad photocopy the letter, and I like practiced writing my like returned letter to them, and then I like put the actual letter over it and traced everything because I was like, it has to be perfect. They have to want me to go to their school. And then now, of course, I know those letters do not really mean all that much, and that they go into a filing cabinet, but still, it was a huge moment. And I remember Duke and Michigan State were my first two letters.
At what point in time did you recognize that you wouldn't be going there? Were they in the mix for a long time, either of those schools? No.
No, Michigan State was not. I kind of fluctuated towards Michigan when I was during my recruiting process. I more so decided early on, like, that would be the school in Michigan I would go to if I did go to a school in Michigan. And I had a really short recruiting process, and I committed really early, like my sophomore year when I was 15 early. So maybe I was even 14. I was really young, and I got some letters, and I talked to the coach, Sally Paul Hamas, from the old assistant coach of Florida, who's now at Georgia State. And I fell in love with her. She was just so easy to talk to. She was so personable. She's like the perfect recruiter, in my opinion. I got roped in immediately. And once I was on campus, I was totally drinking the Kool-Aid, or okay, the Gatorade, whatever. I was drinking, like, I loved Mary Wise. I loved Florida's campus. I loved the girls I met, and just committed really early, all in, head first, was like, I'm going to Florida, with only having seen one other college campus, that being Michigan.
That's a very aggressive move, but knowing you
It,
personally, that's a very you move. You're gonna go all in,
yeah,
you're drinking all the Gatorade or the Kool-Aid.
yeah. I mean, it was interesting because I got very lucky, in my opinion, seeing how common transferring is now, and how people don't always have the perfect college experience. I really felt like, because I made an early decision, you could call any college commitment an uninformed decision, honestly, in my opinion, because you change so much in just those years, that at 15 I thought I was going to be an ESPN announcer. And then I showed up my freshman year and was like, oh, those people wake up really early and wear a lot of makeup and have to do their hair every day. Okay, I don't want to major in broadcasting. And that was just something, like, I changed 6 times within my first 2 years. So 15-year-old me had no clue what I wanted from my college experience.
Do you think that's the main reason why there's so much transferring in the women's game? Is because of
I,
the pressure to commit early?
I think the pressure to commit early is a huge part of it. I think like I said, you change a lot in those years. And sometimes the player I was when I was a freshman and sophomore in high school, getting recruited to these schools, I mean, I needed before college to put on weight and to get better with ball control and to do a lot of things that you have to have a lot of trust in offering someone a scholarship to assume that's going to pan out. And if it doesn't pan out, you can find a school very easily where it will, and someone else can come in who's more talented and take your spot in a heartbeat, which I think there's a lot of competition in that way, for the, like, not fitting the perfect mold that is expected. And it's also difficult because people come in and they make, in big programs, freshmen come in and make huge impacts. And so I'm seeing less and less, like, the patience of the player who comes in and they wait in line and they have an amazing junior and senior year. It just feels like, more often than not, like, a very talented freshman comes in and has a job for 4 years. And those kind of players are, yeah, more prevalent in the game right now.
Yes, they are. Since you only visited 2 college campuses, if you could go back, would you do it a little bit differently?
I think I would go back and do it differently because I'm curious now about how people run their programs, and I would have loved to meet more coaches personally and see see more college campuses, which is so interesting. But I really think, like, I knew I was going to go to Florida after I was on campus the first time. So I think I would have liked to wait and make a more informed decision, let's say.
Mhm.
But in the end, that would just be my curiosity for seeing college campuses and meeting coaches, because I really do feel strongly that I would have ended up at Florida if I visited 200 campuses or the 2 campuses that I visited.
Definitely. And what were your parents like in the recruiting process? What was their involvement?
Well done, Jackson.
My
That would be my question.
Oh wow, you guys are on the same page. My parents were great during the recruiting process because my mom is a college tennis coach, and I think her biggest fear was me being the kid who can't call the coach and have a conversation myself, and to have the parents hovering the entire time and kind of holding my hand through the process, which is probably why they let me commit super early, even though I don't know that I would let my daughter do that. But my parents made sure that I was informed before I called a coach. Like, don't call and not know how they performed last season. Don't call and not know who their best player is, or, the assistant coaches on staff and where they previously coached. So I think they were really great at helping me navigate those conversations, and helping me understand that, it was going to be me playing at that school and they were going to have nothing to do with it whatsoever. So I really had to feel comfortable speaking on the phone, and for the 2 schools I visited, going around on a visit and being the main person to be talking and asking questions.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a hell of a resource, having your parents
Yes.
be college coaches.
My dad was a high school varsity coach, but my mom's a college coach. And so,
Gotcha.
yes.
I was gonna say, like piggybacking off of Jackson's question, once you were pretty gung ho on Florida, did they push you to commit, knowing as a college coach, especially your mom, like how? Because there's some kids that keep you on the ropes,
Mhm.
and then they just bounce. So her being in that position, did she push you a little bit to commit and just get it over with because she understood the pressure that the Florida coaches were under?
No, no, they didn't push me to commit on either side. I didn't feel pressure from the Florida coaches, and I didn't feel pressure from my parents, who know obviously that Florida had to have 3 other outside hitters on their call list if I ended up going somewhere else. So I really felt it helped everybody because they knew I was going to commit early, and there was almost, my mom kind of said, you can hit the brakes a little bit, like, you're still one of the first people who's going to be committing in your class, like, you have time to hit the brakes. But like you said, I had this idea in my head and I was like, 6th gear, pedal to the metal, let's go.
Yeah, because for us, we were a really, I don't want to say revelatory like I'm Mandela, but we were a really revelatory class in that we all committed our junior year, going
Hmm.
like in the summer of our junior to senior year. Josh Taylor, Matt Tarantino, and I all committed, and that was wildly early.
Really?
For the men's game, that is a wildly early thing. And my mom, Marv's really smart. Marv committed for me. He didn't even let me say it. He goes, "Hey, so," and I mean, maybe he's rethinking it now, but he calls me, he goes, "Hey, Micah Christensen was on campus yesterday," and I told him, "Hey, Matt West is coming here next week. It'll probably be a wave." I was like, "Well, what the hell, man? Like, you didn't even give me a chance to say yes or no," which was a really smart move by him. So then
Very
at that
smart
point,
move.
I told my mom, and she goes, "Then you got to commit."
Well, yeah, that feels like the logical next choice.
Right.
Do
So,
you feel like the reason it's later in the men's game is because there's less scholarships available?
I think that could be it. But the women, I think part of it is for sure that. The other part of it is men also just don't mature until a much later age. There are a lot of, if you watch the boys game, there are a lot of really good 14-year-old boys that win
Hmm.
MVP of JOs, and then you never hear about them again.
Huh.
Because they're fully developed men with beards at 15, and then that's it. They've stopped.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Whereas for example, the Puerto Ricans at 14, 13, 12 destroy JOs. They crush it because they're men at that age.
Okay.
And then they start like petering off as they get older.
That's interesting. Yeah, I guess I did watch it's funny because I watched my brother play like middle school basketball and then high school basketball, and his middle school basketball team was the shit. And they were so good. And I was like, these kids are going to the NBA. Like they were killing everybody, towering over kids. And just like late in high school watching, there was like 2 players from that team who ever even made varsity.
Yeah.
And my brother didn't attempt it because he knew he was probably not going to make varsity or something. But it was so interesting to see, like, wow, I thought these were super athletes, and just like how men develop is, yeah, very, very different.
Yeah. So hearing about the women's game and how early the recruiting process starts. Well, it starts really early and it also ends really early. That is an incredibly unique thing for me because
Mhm.
it's just so much more time. There's also way fewer programs too that you can commit to, so it's a little bit
Yeah.
more saturated, but it's getting, I think, from what I understand, I want to say it's getting worse. It's not getting worse. It's just changing. That kids are now recruiting starting earlier, and kids are starting to commit a lot earlier than when I
Hmm.
used to play.
Okay. It feels, I mean, I committed unusually early, and I have felt recruiting has changed a lot since even I was being recruited, because it felt maybe club volleyball has also changed a lot. Like now people
A
recruit to
lot.
clubs and you sign a
Yeah.
contract with your clubs in some places. And I was out of this loop in Michigan because Michigan club scene is so much less competitive than the California scene and a lot of places on the West Coast. Um but it was like absurd to see Shannon Wells, who just got the UVA job but was a associate head coach at Florida while I was there. I mean, watching her recruit was just like knowing which color prom dress she had and what this person's dog's name was, and making these connections, and just unbelievably gifted at it. And like putting origami alligators in the mail. I was like, you know, you really have to make an impact on these kids because the decision making time is very short. And so now you have to send an origami alligator, and
Just
that's kind of,
feels like pro now.
yeah, a little bit.
Feels like pro. It's like we got to give you XYZ for you to get just to come onto campus, and then to get you to commit is even harder. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know if we're going in the right direction or the wrong direction, or if it's just a pendulum swinging really far wide right now, and then we're gonna have to bring it back. But
I'm happy
people
I'm
are gonna
pretty
need.
uninvolved.
I think people should start getting paid if it's going in this direction.
Yeah, I think I have,
For your name, the name thing, I'm all for. Like if you want to run your own camp or clinic as an All-American, do it.
I completely agree. I completely agree because, I mean, there isn't the same payout that you can have as like a men's basketball player, even now like a women's soccer player, because they have established leagues in the US and they have established like, a fan base that volleyball has, but then they're not following volleyball players 8 years after they leave a college team because there's no professional league here to like necessarily keep up with everybody going on, except now they have AU Sports, the short season. But during that time when you leave, or even while you're in school, you should be able to profit off the very hard work that you've put in. And the NCAA, who's clearly screwed up women's sports for long enough, should kind of like take their hands off the wheel and let people use their talent to actually like benefit their life.
I agree. I have nothing to say to that. I'm with you.
Well, how would you do that though? Would it be a pay scale, like direct money going to you, or are you just talking about benefiting off your name, image, and likeness?
I think name, image, likeness is enough for volleyball. It's enough.
I think name, image, and likeness is enough for volleyball. I think it would be pretty easy because they already have a scale at universities where they give you a cost of tuition. It's not a lot of money. I mean, it's some cost of tuition or cost of attendance, it might be called. I can't remember the name because now it's been a few years. But basically, along with you get a campus debit card, and along with having to pay your rent per month and food if you don't have training table, you get a little bit, very little extra money to cost of attendance, because everybody knows, even if you're on a full scholarship, I know because my freshman year this wasn't the case, going out to a birthday dinner was like holding my breath because I didn't actually have time for a job or time to make any money. So I had no money. And I was like, oh God, we're going to go out to a birthday dinner. This is going to be $25. And I'm going to have to call my parents and apologize basically because, it's expensive. Like it adds up. And so that's supposed to cover that kind of expense. And it can or it can't. But along with that, they have a system to determine how much money you should get. And along with that, they could easily calculate who's getting name, image, and likeness, or have a base pay for, I don't know, Instagram followers. Is that like pathetic that we're going to base that off that? But I mean, it would probably make sense.
It would benefit every program too in summer camps,
Yes.
because if you have the Mary Wise volleyball camp or the Keegan Cook volleyball camp with LMA Powell
Yeah,
or who, you know what I mean, and then Ella can make money off that camp too.
that's very true. Instead
You
of
know,
the
like you can have the addition of like, here's our roster, or
mhm,
you can use their names to profit your own program and themselves even
yeah,
more,
like the
which I
break
think is
off of the camp,
totally
the LMA
fair.
Powell setting camp on the side
Yeah,
of
or
the
something like
camp.
that. I don't think you should have to be graduated to be able to do that.
No, no, you shouldn't. They can't even use current players' photo in camp advertisements, I think. I
Yeah,
think that's a rule.
That is true.
Yeah,
yeah.
which is
Yeah, I
ridiculous.
think, yeah, I think you should be able to use your name.
Got to use the moneymaker
Yeah,
here.
but that's crazy though. Like you want your program to benefit. You also want yourself to benefit. So why not everybody feast on like something like a camp or the Lauren
Certainly.
Sanders middle blocker camp or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And especially for volunteer assistants or graduate assistants, that's a time when they, as a coaching staff, decides like, okay, we can't pay this person, but we can give them a good amount of money because camps make so much money, and we can decide a separate salary for them for working the camp, either by being a lead on a court or taking a lot of responsibility. But they could also do that for players. I mean, I think it's illegal right now, but they should, like you said, be able to do that same thing where, like, okay, players don't make money during the year, this volunteer coach does make money in the year, they're all expected to show up and work a job. So they could do the same thing they do with them and decide like a rate for, like you said, the LMA Powell setting clinic during camp.
Yes, I'm sure we've all worked camps and we've in college, and you get the paycheck at the end, and you're like,
I'm like, oh, this is worth the fractures I feel in the bottom of my feet for standing 12 hours a day for 3 weeks. That's totally
it's
fine.
it's
I
below
can go buy a
minimum wage for
cheeseburger.
sure, but you're like, I need this, and you want
Yeah,
to impress your coach. You're like, this is all in the
exactly.
loyalty here.
The Florida camp is unbelievable because they have it. Dave Booz is a technical genius, and he is a schedule guy. And I am not a schedule girl. I would say I have punctuality anxiety to the point where everyone thinks I'm very, very punctual, but I'm scarred for life from college volleyball for the punctuality. that I needed to abide by. And the camp was like water from like 12:03 to 12:06, and then you explain the drill for 1 minute, and I had an iPad, and Dave would always walk by my court, and I would have a group of like recruits or something, and then my hands are shaking, and I'm like, okay, everybody, we're gonna do all hands pepper today, and then I'm checking my watch, looking at the iPad, and it was just like the laughing stock of Florida volleyball over the summers. And every time I was like, I am like mentally, physically, and emotionally, I should be earning 12 times what I'm earning right now.
Oh man. Well, let's go back instead of us chastising the NC2A anymore. Let's go back to your freshman year at Florida.
Okay.
Did you feel ready at all when you walked on campus to play at a high level?
When I walked on campus, yes. When I finished our first summer practice, no. I was feeling good about my personal game because I had had very little reason not to feel good about it up until that point. Um, and other than playing other talented players in club, but I was like, yeah, the ball, when I do my like no looky cookie chop shot down the line, it scores 1000% of the time. And of course, I like walked into the gym and did this on the first ball, and someone treated it as a free ball, which they rightfully should treat that as a free ball. And so I just realized I had to hit the ball a lot harder. I came in weighing 127 pounds soaking wet. And I was small. I had never lifted a weight in my life. And I I felt ready to play, but I just like had to find a new gear every single day going into the gym during summer. Summer B was a lifesaver my freshman year. Um, and I started the
Definitely.
season during preseason. I remember like feeling like I kind of won a spot, but like when you feel you won a spot, it's because you're playing as good-ish as a person who has a spot. It's not because you really won the spot and blew them out of the water every day. You know, and occasionally it is like that, but in my opinion, I was like, I'm playing as good as her. I was looking at our numbers. Maybe I was a little better one day, she was a little better the next day. And we had a meeting going into the season with the coaching staff, and they were like, you're not going to start the first game. And I remember feeling like dagger through my heart, basically, like so sad about it. And but it was clear that I wasn't totally ready at that time, and I ended up starting for the majority of my freshman season and playing 3 rotations fairly well, which was, I think, a huge win considering the fact that I look back and I just look like a girl amongst women at that point in my life.
That's fair. Did you, if you could pinpoint one thing that translated into your sophomore year where you thought, okay, mentally I need to make this adaptation going forward, what would it have been in your like evolutionary process? Is it just physicality?
It was a little bit physicality. The reason I won the spot my second year is because I was a better passer than we had graduated. My freshman year, we had 3 amazing DSs, and they played back row for both outsides, me and the other girl who was playing, and one of them was a libero. And libero. I'm confusing my words with this now after playing professionally, but one of them was a libero. And my second year, we did not have that kind of depth in the backcourt, and I was naturally a better passer, along with Jiva Raychek, the girl who was freshman player of the year, and then I was competing with her my junior year, and another more physical player than us had the spot because we had a DS. And so the next year, Jiva and I won the job basically just on ball control. So I really needed to hit the ball harder, but we had a first team All-American opposite Alex Holston, and they didn't look to me in big situations offensively. I played well, but I was not like a glue that held our team together by any means. I could just put the ball in a good enough spot for us to set Alex a ton of balls. And that was kind of the transition I had to make, was adjusting the mindset that I was always a go-to player growing up. And now I was like the complement, making sure if I wanted to be on the court, I had to pass well enough to get Alex the ball, and Ramat, of course.
Was that a conversation that you had to have with Mary, where it was like a role clarity type situation, or is it something that you came to your own fruition of, I have to do this? It was a survival instinct.
Both, kind of, because I knew that I could see that what I had worked on all spring was not hitting, and I wanted to get better at hitting because that's where I naturally feel most excited about the game. And my spring season, my freshman year, was defense and serve receive and more defense and more serve receive and defense until my elbows were bleeding and more serve receive. And I was like, okay, they really don't want me to get that much better at hitting. And then the first spring practice, it was clear why, because Alex is a first team All-American, and Ramat was also a first team All-American. And we needed the two of them to take a ton of swings, and they were able to do that, and they did a really good job of it. So I kind of pieced it together on my own. And then we had end of the year and beginning of the year kind of coaches meetings where they talked about what they needed from you, what you expected of yourself, and yada yada yada. And that conversation, I'm sure, was very clear in those meetings as well.
Looking back, did you, because I think those meetings in the moment don't feel that necessary, because you're like, yeah, I get it. Looking back, do you appreciate those meetings more now? Of like, wow, I can't believe they took the time to sit down and tell me, like, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to go down.
I appreciate those meetings a lot. At the time, I was also very excited to have those meetings because I'm a words of affirmation person, and I crave the approval of my coaches, and I want to know that we are on the same path and that I'm doing something, especially because I love and respect them so much. I wanted to know that they were happy with me and that they were liked me or something. And this meeting was another way to get alone time with them, to ask them what I needed to do, on a personal standpoint, and then also like how they feel I was like fitting in with the team, because we also had player evaluations where the team could put in their assessment of another individual. And you talked about that in the meetings, which at times can be a very hard conversation.
Oh, that's cool, and
Yeah.
really it's shitty at the same time.
I mean, they assess it, it leaves room for, unless you are an all around bad person and bad player, it's not the worst conversation you've ever had, because there's assessment on confidence, on teammate skills, on discipline, on volleyball IQ. So okay, if you are the worst player in the gym, you might have a bad volleyball IQ score, and the coaches are not going to roast you for that in your meeting, because no one there is under the impression you're going to be the starting libero next year, let's say.
Right.
But if you are the worst in discipline, the worst in teammate skills, the worst in volleyball IQ as well, and improvement is another category. So, there can be, maybe your best player did not get that much better the last year, but she's still your best player. And one of your weaker players might not play, but she's improved a lot over the season. So, there's room to feel very good about what you're doing. And that list is helpful in helping other people understand their role on the team, because you also have to rank yourself. And that's when a conversation can be had. It's like, oh, you put yourself as a number one teammate, and your teammate average is 17 as the last person. And so that's a really interesting conversation to have with people, and an eye opener that I think does allow pretty good acceptance of roles at Florida, for example.
Have you had that happen to you personally, where you've ranked yourself? Well, probably I would suspect the opposite for you, where you've ranked yourself 17 and then you had a higher ranking.
I only once ranked myself higher than I was, and it was my freshman year summer B when I ranked myself as like 6 on teammate because I think, I'm a great teammate. So it's like the number goes, you rank the first teammate to the 17th teammate if there's a girl on 17, if there's 17 girls on your team. So everyone has to have a position. And I put myself as like 6 because I'm like, if someone needs me, they can call me. Like, I'm a hard worker. I come to practice every day. And of course, I was like 13th because no one even knew me. The upperclassmen didn't even like care about me or like me. At that point, as we all know, like freshmen are kind of dead weight on your summer B shenanigans. So that was the first time. They didn't make me feel too bad about it. And then every time after that, I'm like self-aware to a fault. So I was pretty on the ball, or I put myself higher than the others ranked me because I was like, oh no, I don't want to be that person.
How did the coaches present that player evaluation thing? Did they kind of give you an explanation of what it is and why they're using it? Or just kind of
Yes.
say, hey, here's the piece of paper and go for it?
They had a pretty good explanation. There's always a good explanation with Dave and Mary specifically because Dave is so technical and such a like stats guy that these numbers are important for him. And Mary has been doing it long enough that when you go through your season rules, you might like raise your eyebrows and be like, that's an interesting rule. And she will say, if it's a rule, it means it needs to be said. And so there is a long list and a lot of explanation around the paperwork that you file and around these kind of activities that we would do. And for this one specifically, it was said it's not meant to be something that hurts your feelings. It's not meant to be something that you should take personally. It's meant as a area of growth, and it's meant to show how you see yourself, how others on the team see you, and to be as best a teammate and as much as you can improve in these areas to kind of like see where you start out and to see like at the end, for example, by the end of my freshman year, I was not the 13th teammate anymore because I had made connections with people and was getting along with people. And that's a moment they're not going to yell at me for not being the number 1 teammate, but say, cool, you got 6 spots higher. Great. And that's kind of the end of the conversation, unless there's some like blaring detail on the sheet. I think it's honestly, now that I'm out of the way, sorry, I'm explaining this for too long. I think that it's a great way because coaches can't see what happens during summer training and they don't really know all the dynamics that are going on. And I think it's also a way for them to keep an eye on like, oh, you put someone as 17 on everything. You must like really hate her.
Yeah. They can't be the worst at every skill.
Yeah, they can't be the worst. You must have like something personally against this girl.
Yeah, totally.
Was there, when you did it, is it like sad face to frowny face? I mean, like 1 through 17? Or do you have a comment box as well?
You don't get a comment box, I think for the better, because numbers like 8 through 12 or 8 through 13, there's no reason that you put them in any sort of order. It's just like, this is how the number, basically, I just need to fill these spaces. And the comment box for volleyball IQ 17 would be like, she can't pass a free ball. I don't
was
know.
just thinking like if she's number 17 teammate, like let's say it's your number 1 setter, for
Yeah.
example, and maybe just she doesn't talk to anyone ever outside of the court, right? It's like, okay, she's like number 13 teammate, and everybody marks her down as number 13, but it's not because nobody dislikes her, it's just nobody knows her.
Yeah. I think that's a conversation that they have. There's been some questions I've answered like, oh, why did you put so and so far down? It seems like she's a totally fine girl. And that's the same answer and why I was ranked low my summer B my freshman year. It's just like they don't really know you.
Yeah.
And we also did dates where like you had to go on a date once a week with someone during summer B. And that was really helpful because otherwise, like you guys know, it's so rare as a freshman to go and have coffee with a senior on the team who, has a schedule, is about to graduate, has their maybe like already established friendships and boyfriend or girlfriend already there. So that was another thing that I felt like an effort to create a team atmosphere is definitely made at Florida, which like I have very strong lasting friendships from every year that I've played, which, I feel very lucky to say.
How would you guys as a team deal with it when there was some resistance from a player to, like, not necessarily with the player evaluations because that's coach driven, but
Mhm.
like with hanging out with your teammate, the date night kind of stuff?
It depended on who was the seniors at the time. So my freshman and sophomore year, I think there was a little bit more rule breaking because we had a very lax senior class, especially my sophomore year. We had a very lax senior class, and my group of classmates was not like that. We were rule followers. We all were like drinking the Kool-Aid, as I had said before, just were on the Mary Wise train, whether it led to Candyland or like a brick wall. Basically, we were just like sitting on board and wanted to do everything right. And so I think that depended on, yeah, a form of leadership that was in place. And every year we were successful, so it's not necessarily about whether the team was going to be good or bad. It was like the interworkings of the relationship. So my junior year, we lost NCAA tournament on an ace between CK, my best friend, and now she coaches at College of Charleston, CK and I. And that was devastating in a lot of ways. And my senior year, we decided during the entire summer, if someone didn't say mine in a name, which is a general rule in our practice, we just like as seniors decided everyone's getting on the line and we're running self-inflicted. And so we did that for all of my senior spring. We had a dry season my senior year. Nobody had a problem with it, like because the seniors were like, we're gonna ask you guys to do this. Vermont, All-American, who can probably get drunk before practice every day and still be the best blocker in the gym, is having a dry season. So there was a there was a complete understanding and respect amongst the group. And I think it all depends on who your seniors are and what rules they themselves follow.
Or set.
Yeah, set too.
Wow. I think that's awesome that you say that because I've talked to Jackson. We've talked on this podcast about this, but we've had guys that I played with in college on, and we
Mhm.
all said our best practices were the ones where we were going to fight, where somebody was about to go under the net, and those didn't happen often. It was probably once a week, but we all agree that we were too nice. So hearing
That
you guys had a great friendship, but knew you guys screwed up big, and then were willing to fix that in practice every day, with a punishment.
mhm.
Maybe it's a little far for some people, but for me, I'm like, hell yeah.
Yeah,
If that's what it takes, then that's what it takes.
I think a general understanding of the game has to be in place when you set those kind of rules. For example, like CK was, and now she's a coach, so it makes sense, above and beyond anyone else who was thinking of these things in the gym. So she would, if we were playing 6-on-6, whether there's a scoreboard or whether it's spring practice or summer with just us, she would serve at me every time. And that was kind of strange because I was one of the best passers on the other side. And I would, in spring and summer, you're playing with your entire roster. So you're also playing next to a DS who never actually gets to start on the team.
Right.
And CK would serve at me every time because she's like, I'm going to get the player who I pass next to better. I'm going to give her my toughest ball, even if they win because Carli's passing every ball. I would rather do that. And if I'm hitting on the other side and I tip a ball over the block to, yeah, our second setter who never plays right back defense in a game, she would like yell at me on the car ride home and be like, you should hit at me every time because then you'll actually know if you like hit a good ball. And that's such a confident thing to say, and it's 100% true. It's my biggest pet peeve now as a professional, when sometimes you take girls from the second division practice team, and they just need to fill a space on your court, and you have players who are like, I'm going to win the day, I'm going to be an all-star in practice today, I'm going to serve every ball at this 18-year-old kid who is not actually going to be playing with you against the top team in the league.
Yeah.
Totally. I felt the same way. I used to serve our libero and Josh as much as I possibly could. And Marv was smart. He would pin us again, not pin us. That's a very negative way of saying it now, because I know that there are people in the gym that pin people against each other. He would not pin us against each other, but he would, any time in preseason where we were competing, Josh and I were never on the same team.
Mhm.
That would never happen. That's like impossible. And it made it more fun because now you're competing. Because then it's so part of it too is, it's like ego. It's like, who's going to walk out of this with some pride today?
Yeah, certainly.
Who
Or
can
who
talk
can make
shit
a
for the next like
situation
24
better.
hours? Yeah.
I get very irritated when you have the best player on a team, or one of the best players on a team, who plays with maybe like I said, the girl from the second division, or the girl who never gets a chance to play. And that, and it's just like the excuse left and right, that ball needs to be higher, oh, I thought you would go, like the crisscrossing of communication. And I really do think, like, you don't talented players make other people around them better, and everybody knows that. That's been commonly said. I'm not like saying something new here with that statement, but it's a lot about whether or not you can also accept blame and accept more responsibility and find a way to make your team better in a situation where you're not setting your best hitter at practice that day, but he's still your best hitter. He still has to like show that you can hit a ball if someone chucks it in the air. And I do really enjoy those practices because you get to see some character.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How was the transition into pro for you? Because you're talking about Florida, a very family-like atmosphere from what it sounds like. And you said you've always been big on getting words of affirmation from your coaches. Like, how has the relationship been with your coaches the last few years? And yeah, just how's it been going?
So my transition to professional volleyball was as smooth as anyone's I've heard of, because I went to a team coached by a woman, Magali, who's pretty well known in France. She's the general manager now of the club that Maddie just won the French championship with this past season. And I played for her, and she's as similar to Mary as you can get in like an intense French woman, basically. And she really did like take time to get to know us a little bit, and was pretty interested in our lives outside of the gym, and you were able to have a conversation with her as like person to person, I would say, which is so important for me. I need to feel comfortable as a person to play well. At least I did at that time in my career. And so my transition it was interesting because, again, I had the same feeling like when I walked into Florida's gym and my like favorite shot didn't score and it seemed easy. Like, I just realized in professional volleyball, I have to hit the ball so much harder, and I have to hit it harder consistently. And that was kind of like, I'm a low risk player by nature. I don't like making mistakes. I, you know, I really don't like making mistakes. That's if the ball's not perfect, I would rather just like play another day, put it in and wait for the situation to arise. And I had to get a lot better at taking risk in those situations and going in with confidence, I would say, because I was getting subbed out a lot my first season and even into my second season when I wasn't being aggressive enough. And I was just thinking, like, what do you want me to do? Like, hit it to the back wall? And then in practice, a girl would hit it to the back wall and I would hear like, brava, like, this is volleyball. And I was like, fuck me. Like, okay, I need to do that.
Yeah, it's unique how It's something that that I talk about a lot with my attackers abroad and with my little kids here. They're like 16. I wanted to yank this girl the other day, actually. Poor girl. I hope she hears this. And I wanted to yank her because I said, I don't care if you hit it under the net. I don't care if you hit it at the back wall. I could care less. I just want you to hit one. I just want
Yeah,
you
I
to
mean,
hit a
that's solid
volleyball.
advice.
I was like, I could care less. I was like, there's nobody here that can sub in for you today. So you can do whatever you want. You can screw up the whole game. You could lose us a match right now. I just
That
need you to
must have
start
made her feel so secure.
hitting the ball, you know? And she wouldn't do it. And I was like, I don't know what it takes
Yeah.
to get you to feel like you can do it besides obviously in practice. That was our first tournament together. So then now in practice, I'm trying to encourage her more without being
Mm,
like, nobody, you can't get yanked, you know?
yep. We've
Something
got
else.
nobody.
We've got nobody here. But how did you adjust to taking risk? Like, is it just a mindset that you obviously you had to change yourself, or was there something that Magdalene or Francois said that made you shift and acknowledge, like, okay, I can do this?
I think I played with setters who gave great opportunities to the player who's in rhythm. And that was that was a situation I felt really comfortable scoring in. And sometimes as an outside hitter who had talented opposites on my teams, you wouldn't get that situation until mid game, or it could have been, a pipe at 20 all when you haven't hit the pipe all game because of perfect passing and your middle is playing great or the opposite's going off, whatever the case may be. And I had to tell myself, like, when that situation comes, you 100% have to go for it, because the problem was not that I wasn't scoring all the time in high ball situations. I was like being, I would say, like medium aggressive, like hitting it, but just not like cracking it because I have a pretty whippy arm.
Conservative.
Yes, conservative with the swing, and it was scoring sometimes and sometimes not. But then when I did get the rhythm, that was like I could not mentally allow myself to be like, you have to play conservative today, because that was a situation you're hoping for and that you need to kind of get your confidence. For me, at least in the beginning, I really needed those swings to get my confidence. And I kind of just adopted this mentality based on the fear of getting subbed out, not on my own, like, wow, I'm like growing as a person. It was just like, I don't want to get taken out of this game because I'm in France, and the only reason I'm in France is to play volleyball. So I started like trying to just rip balls and realizing that in my own game personally, when I do get my feet to the ball and hit it as hard as I can, I actually rarely make a mistake. I usually make the mistake when I decide it's a time to be conservative, or when I'm like last minute thinking to roll shot a ball, which I still don't know how to do after 15 years of volleyball. I don't know how to roll shot, but like these kind of mistakes. And so I just kind of ran with that like thing in my game, and it's been getting better and better every year. This past year is probably the best I played hitting wise.
That's awesome. I have heard, and I had a kid ask me this the other day, and now that you say that, I feel like I gave him sound advice. And with other
Hmm.
attackers that I've played with, you can't, Jackson knows this, ain't no such thing as halfway crooks. You either go full or you set it over. On like especially in a really high ball situation, like you see people try to just roll balls in and it hits the top of their fingers or it goes
Yeah.
under the net because they're thinking. Whereas you watch the best of the best do it, and I don't know so many women's players as I do the men, but you watch like Inga Pet or Matt Anderson or Taylor or
Hmm.
whoever, and they just hit everything.
Yep.
There's no halfway. They're either hitting it or they have a profound intellectual ability to understand that they can roll this ball. But they're always doing something with purpose versus just
Yeah.
like don't screw this up. It's the same concept as when you tell a kid hey, don't miss your serve, the only thing they're thinking is don't miss the serve, and then they miss.
Yeah, exactly. Like I would say 90% of the time you tell someone not to miss their serve, they do miss their serve.
Yeah, and they miss it horribly.
Including like we did something where you're supposed to visualize yourself doing good things. And I had to stop doing it because every time I visualize myself serving, I like visualize myself tossing the ball behind me or hitting it under the net. Like I visualize my worst fear. And by being like a worst fear type player, I like have never done that in a game situation.
Yeah.
But it's certainly the first thing I visualize myself doing, or the same as the kid who is gets a super high ball from right back across the court. You have all the time in the world, and midway through the air you think like, oh god, what if I hit this like way out of bounds? So then you like tip it and it goes under the net.
Yeah. I mean, it feels the same. I'm sure it's the same with receiving. I know it's the same as setting, where it's that ball that's kind of halfway. It's not a high ball, it's not a perfect ball. And then all of a sudden, because you double clutch, is what I call it,
Mm,
like double clutch, then it lands at like 2 meters. It never goes tight enough, because you never
yeah.
get your hip around because all of a sudden you weren't aggressive enough because you overthought it.
Mm,
And I'm sure receiving the
mm,
same way, where you think, I mean, it's the easy ones, right? It's the ones that like it hits the net, and then all of a sudden you have more time than you thought, and then you're bunting balls to people. Or
exactly.
like a
That's
high,
very true.
like a high float serve, and you have to give it juice back. But because
Hmm.
you're not used to doing that, you're like, oh, this is an easy ball. And the best example is free balls. You're like,
Free
this is
balls.
so easy, but it takes so much mental capacity to make it perfect.
If you want to watch people just unravel, make a free ball drill where you have to do like 60 decent free balls in a row and just watch people when it gets to the number like 45 and how fucking stressed out they are, and myself included. I'm like, I've just passed like 20 free balls perfectly, and this last free ball is going over the net for sure. It's going over the net. And to see like tendencies and conservative tendencies come out, the same ones that I would so much rather as a passer wear balls. Like I love jump topspin serves. I love when someone like whips a low float at me because I can just like hit it off the top of my arms, even like my chest, and it's totally
Mhm.
fine. But when someone like puts in their low float, like low lollipop coach's serve that kind of dies, I can just feel myself absolutely overthink the situation. I hope no one's scouting this.
Yeah, absolutely. What have been some of the differences in training since you've been overseas?
That's a great question. Um, I would say the first difference is you sign 1-year contracts, and you sign contracts. Most of the team signs contracts as like a woman who might be 30 years old or 22, but somewhere in a range of like you have what you're good at and you know what you're good at this moment in time. Very different from having an 18-year-old who has a lot of skills that need to be developed. And plus, even if you do spend a ton of time developing those skills, they're going to sign a new contract the next year and you're going to spend the entire year working on something small. So I think we play a lot of 6-on-6
Mhm.
in professional volleyball. I know Madison and I this year have called each other as we were like our bodies were breaking down, being like, we've played 6-on-6 5 days in a row and now we have a game tomorrow. And it happens so often because people just need to play. They need to dig a hard driven ball. They need to like read the situation. And there's much less of a system you can see with teams. You
Mhm.
know, I think it does count on a coach scouting well. Then you can tell if someone has a system. But one person plays middle back way differently than the next person. Their next outside plays middle back. And in college, you can really see like a system that teams have, and they've spent 4 years developing and teaching their players how to do that. And it's very unclear in professional volleyball unless you watch a lot of film, like what people are individually going to decide to do that day.
Hmm.
That is true. When you're scouting people, when you're scouting teams, you're scouting people, not a system.
Hmm.
That's very well said. Yeah, I agree.
Hmm. Thank
100.
you.
That's spot on. Because the way that you block as a left side versus the way that your teammate blocks is probably like she could static block. She just stands at the pin waiting, and you
Yeah.
swing block constantly and want to help the middle block.
Yeah, exactly. And I also asked my coach the first year we were blocking slides, and I was like, I usually watch the player go in case it dies, and I shuffle block to the slide, but I can also swing block to the slide. Like, you can do both. And I asked the coach, I was like, do you prefer if I shuffle block or I swing block? She was like, yes, like whatever one you do is the best. And I was like, okay. So it's all about that. Like
Just
the
get
other
it
person was
done.
standing, just get it done. No regard for like if it hits off your head and goes to target, it's like amazing pass. Bravo, Carli.
I do kind of like that philosophy to an extent, though, because it gives so much creative freedom to the player.
Hmm.
It's one of those things. And Mike, I mean, I've 6 different coaches in 6 years, and they've all said the same thing. They're like, if it works, it works. If it
Yeah.
doesn't, we have a problem.
I
Which
I
is
find that to be a relief as well in my career, especially
But at
this
the same
past year
time,
when I
it's
felt.
also really shitty because it puts more pressure on the player than it does the philosophy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
because there's no
I've
system that you can come back to. It's just you do it, and if you can make it work, great. And if you can't, you're fired.
yeah, my coach this past season, he was very much so like, I've given you all the tools. I gave you a piece of paper that told you what the other team did. And if you didn't use that piece of paper in within your game to the best of your ability that day, it's like standing up and looking at the president of the club being like, I did my job. Why do we have such duds out there, Which is very funny for me.
Yeah, there's a lot of pros. So unique. And you can see it in college volleyball now that I'm getting older, and you start looking at people that are on the last leg of their contract, and all of a sudden they start screaming a lot more, right? They start
Yeah,
taking like really aggressive timeouts. They're not communicating to players as much in a
no. It looks like to me, it looks like someone being like holding a big sign above their head, being like, look at me, I'm coaching. It's like, like yelling at people. Athletic director comes into the gym and it's like pulling players aside, being like,
yeah,
okay, yeah, check this out, like pointing to very like not clear things on the court. And it's very funny to me to see this as well.
yeah. I mean, I recognized it when I was younger, but not to the extent I do now of how different people are when the right person's in the gym.
Yeah,
When they
that's
gotta
very true.
be a pro, all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, I'm good.
Yeah,
Don't worry about me."
puts the phone down that was watching a Manchester United game during not naming names here. It was not involved in college.
Jesus, life of pro, man.
Yeah,
Well, Carly, I think we're good here.
great. Thanks for having me. This was a pleasure. I love talking about volleyball. You guys are a joy to Zoom with.
Thank you for the time. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank
Yep,
you very much.
no problem. No problem. Thanks, guys.
Of course.